Singaporeans or Singaporean people refers to citizens or people who identify with the city-state of Singapore. Singapore is a multi-ethnic, multicultural and multilingual country, and Singaporeans of Chinese, Malay, Indian and Eurasian descent have made up the vast majority of the population since the 19th century. In 1819, the port of Singapore was established by Sir Stamford Raffles, who opened it to free trade and free immigration on the island's south coast. Many immigrants from the region settled in Singapore. By 1827, the population of the island was composed of people from various ethnic groups. Singapore is a multilingual and multicultural society home to people of groups of many different ethnic, religious, and national origins, with the majority of the population made up of Chinese, Malay, Indian and Eurasian descent. The Singaporean identity was fostered as a way for the different ethnic groups to integrate and identify with the nation, while preserving the culture and traditions of each ethnic group, instead of assimilating the minority cultures into a single majority culture. According to a 2017 survey by the Institute of Policy Studies, 49% of Singaporeans identify with both the Singaporean identity and their ethnic identity equally, while 35% would identify as Singaporeans first and 14.2% would identify with their ethnic identity. As of 2019, the population of Singaporeans stands at 4,026,200 and the population of overseas Singaporeans stands at 340,751, with 217,200 individuals retaining their citizenship. The earliest records of settlement on the island date back to the 2nd century, where the island was identified as a trading port which was part of a chain of similar trading centers that linked Southeast Asia with the Tamil Indians and the Mediterranean. The earliest settlers of the island were known as the Orang Lots, and the island was an outpost of the Srivijaya Empire until it was invaded by the Tamil Emperor Rajendra Chola, the first of the Chola Empire in the 11th century. According to the 19th century Chinese record investigation of Southern Pacific, it described the presence of Chinese tombs in Singapore. Words and inscriptions recording the period of later Liang and Emperor Gong of Song were found on these tombs, and this may suggest that from 907 to 1274, some Chinese had settled, lived, died and were buried in Singapore. A small Malay kingdom, known as the Kingdom of Singapura, was founded in 1299 by a fleeing Srivijayan prince, Sang Nila Utama, who was crowned as the Raja of the new state. After the fall of the kingdom in 1398, the island fell under the suzerainty of various regional empire and Malayan sultanates until its destruction by Portuguese raiders in 1613. Prior to the arrival of Raffles, there were about 100 indigenous Malays living on the island under the Johor Sultanate. Most of the indigenous Malays came from the Malay archipelago. There were an estimated 150 people living on the island, who were predominantly Orang Lot, with small population of 120 Malays who were the followers of Temangong Abdul Rahman, and about 20 to 30 Chinese. The majority of Singaporeans today are descendants of immigrants who settled on the island when Singapore was founded as a British trading port by Raffles in 1819. Except for the Malays who are indigenous to the region of Malaya. At that time, Raffles decided Singapore would be a free port, and as news of the free port spread across the archipelago, Bugis, Javanese, Perunak and Chinese, South Asian and Hadrami Arab traders flocked to the island, due to the Dutch trading restrictions. After 6 months of Singapore's founding as a free port, the population increased to 5,000, with the first census of 1824 showing that 6,505 out of the 10,683 total were Malays and Bugis settlers. Within the first few months of becoming a British settlement, a large number of Chinese migrants also started to settle on the island. In 1825, the population of the island had passed the 10,000 mark, and by the census of 1826, there were more Chinese with a population of 6,088. As compared to 4,790 Malays excluding the Bugis and Javanese. By 1871, due to the influx of migrants from Malaya, China, India and other parts of Asia, Singapore's population had reached nearly 100,000, with over half of them being Chinese. Many of these early migrants were predominantly male and they would usually return to their home countries after they had earned enough money. By the early to mid-20th century, an increasingly significant number of migrant workers chose to stay permanently, with their descendants forming the bulk of Singapore's population today. In 1957, Singapore attained self-governance and Singaporean citizenship was granted to selected residents who were born in Singapore or the Federation of Malaya, British citizens who had been resident for 2 years, and others who had been resident for 10 years. On September 16, 1963, all Singaporeans effectively became